So when we're discussing the importance of knowing your birth chart, a birth chart is a blueprint of your life, of how the planets were placed at the time of your birth. And the birth chart will tell you your big three, which is very important because I know that most of us, we grew up knowing only the sun sign, knowing that if I was born on this date, then it means I fall under this zodiac sign, and that was it. And often we would read in the papers, reading those horoscopes, and only to find out some of the things are not happening, even though some are happening, especially things like your character traits. Maybe you do see ukuthi, okay, I'm a Gemini and I feel ukuthi I resonate with this. But when it comes to the specifics of how things are happening in your life and how the things are predicted in the horoscopes, you would find ukuthi it doesn't actually match up with what is happening in your life. I have realized ukuthi it's simply because we didn't know much about the big three. So when you do your birth charts, you find out about your big three first, which is your sun sign, your moon sign, and your rising sign. And the rising sign being the most important one because that is your first impression to the universe. And I believe Uguti, that is how the universe receives you, and that is how the energy is projected towards you. So knowing your sign only is not enough. You also need to know the rising, which is important because it sets out the theme of how the houses are placed in your birth chart. Houses are very important because we have 12 houses that represent aspects of life. And if you can go deep to all the houses, you will find Uguti, there is no aspect of life that is not covered in those 12 houses. So we all have the big three, the 12 houses, and then we have the zodiac signs in those houses. What sets out the theme is the rising sign, meaning Uguti, the rising sign of yours will be occupying your first house. So say for instance your rising sign is Scorpio, it would mean Uguti, when your first house is occupied by Scorpio, your second house would be Sagittarius, your third house would be Capricorn. If you are Aquarius rising, then your first house would be Aquarius, second house Pisces, third house Aries. Knowing those houses is very important because the first house represents image, second house your financial matters, third house communication, fourth house it represents family, home and ancestors, fifth house represents your passion, and your relationships, but those romance and dating. Virgo, which is the sixth house, represents your daily routines, health, and how you perfectionism as well. Then seventh house represents relationships and justice and fairness. Eighth house represents transformation and death. Sagittarius, which is the ninth house, represents higher learning and wisdom. Capricorn represents structure because that is your career and public image. Aquarius represents our friendship groups and networking skills. Pisces is intuition, so we go back to Aries, then the image. So knowing all these aspects, even if you can go deep and maybe just throw in any other aspect of life, you will find Uguti, it is there in one of these houses. And then when we go further to explain this thing of your birth chart, once you know your houses, then you need to know your first house. Automatically your first house is your rising sign, and then your second house would be the sign that follows your rising sign naturally. Meaning what I just explained, Uguti, if your first house is Scorpio, then naturally Sagittarius will be your second house. Once you know your houses and your signs, then you need to find out what planets are activating those houses. If your image is activated by, say, for instance, Mars, then it would mean that you come across too strong, like a person that may sometimes intimidate people. And this happens a lot to people baga Aries. People find them intimidating because Mars is a planet of action, is a planet of combat. Mars is like a soldier. So knowing what planets is activating what house, you need to know your 10th house, your house of career is activated by what planets. You need to know your house, your second house, the house of financial matters. Also know what planet is activating that house because that is very important. Another thing that I always see when I do birth charts is that someone who has Neptune in the second house, it is most likely that you will fall a victim to scams. People will scam you because if there is Neptune in your second house, Neptune can give us scams and delusions at times. Also knowing planets and knowing traits, planets and their energies, how they affect us, what they do, because everything has a healed version and an unhealed version. You need to know, even though there are those planets that we are sometimes, scared of, especially planets like Pluto, Mars, Saturn, because Saturn governs time. He gives us delays at times. But when you are healed, those traits that we are afraid of, they are not so much of a threat, because once you accept these things and accept these energies, you get to know a way of how to navigate these energies and how to lean in towards the universe. So knowing your birth chart means you need to know all your houses, know all your signs and the planets that are activating your houses, so that you understand why things are happening the way that are happening in your life. And then you move away from anger, you move away from shame, you move away from all those low vibrational energies, so that you can be able to meditate successfully and attract the things that you want. Because the main aim of understanding and knowing these things is knowing how to live a peaceful life, because when you are calm and peaceful and happy, it is only then that you attract things in life. So now that you know your houses, you know your rising sign, and also you know the planets that are affecting your houses, you also go deep. As you go further into this thing, you also need to know the aspects, meaning you also need to know the positions, because there are positions which are called the squares, which forms a 90-degree angle. And those planets which are forming a square, sometimes, not just sometimes, they always cause some sort of friction and tension between those houses. If planets are forming an opposition, there is also a tension there. But then again, there are also good aspects where you find there is a sextile, or there is just a harmonious energy, which is like a portal for you that you can use whenever planets are placed in that position. So that is another thing that you need to know as you go further into learning about your birth chart. And lastly, maybe what I can mention now is the degrees, because each and every house has a 30-degree mark. From here, when the planet enters, say for instance the sun is moving from Sagittarius, remember we just had a Sagittarius season. If it moves and then it enters Capricorn, it will start at 0 degrees. This is a 30-degree angle. So when it begins at 0 and then it moves, at the end of a transit, it will come to 29, and then 30 automatically will be 0 when it enters Aquarius. So those degrees from 0 to 1, they have a meaning. This is where the numerology comes into place. When I speak about people knowing themselves, knowing who you really are, you need to know about all of these things, starting from your ancestors, if that is what you believe in. Understand who you are, understand the energies of your ancestors that you carry, what they want from you, cleanse and release them, and then know your birth chart. Know how the planets are, the energies of the planets are affecting you, and also know your numerology aspect of things, because when a planet is in 0 degrees, it is at the beginning, but when it gets to 15, it's transformational. That is where you transform. And then there at 29 degrees, it's a completion. It's a very critical degree. If you have any of these degrees from 0 to 30, it means something which you need to know and understand. But I think maybe in the future we will have to dive deep into that. But at the moment, I would just like for people to know and understand this thing, how it affects us. When you have problems, do not just deal with one aspect of your life. Do not just look into ancestors and think that that is the complete picture of what is happening in the universe. There is a whole lot more that is happening beyond, over and beyond the problems that we think are brought about by our ancestors.